My name is Ruby Franklin, and at 67, the golden years of my retirement aren't exactly shining the way I'd planned. The country house in Vermont that's been in my family for 3 generations was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, my daughter Amanda decided it would make a perfect summer home for her husband's wealthy family. Her exact words still sting. "It's theirs now, you have no rights to go there." I just nodded and smiled, but little did she know what I had planned for when they arrived with their moving trucks. If you're watching this from a place where family means everything, hit that subscribe button while I tell you how I handled the family who thought they could take what was rightfully mine. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts during the 1960s, my grandparents' country house in rural Vermont was my personal paradise. Every summer, my parents would pack our station wagon to the brim, and we'd make the 4-hour journey north to spend 3 glorious months away from the city heat. Those memories are etched into my soul. Waking to the scent of pine trees afternoons spent picking wild blackberries until my fingers were stained purple and fishing with my grandfather in the crystal clear pond where he taught me patience isn't just a virtue but a necessity for catching the big ones. When my grandparents passed away, the house went to my father, who preserved it exactly as it had always been. A simple 2-story colonial with weathered blue shutters surrounded by sugar maples that blazed with color every fall. The wraparound porch with its creaky swing became the place where my father told his best stories, where my mother shelled peas from her garden, and where I later brought my own daughter Amanda to experience the magic that had shaped my childhood. 30 years ago, when my parents decided to retire to Florida, they surprised me with the deed to the Vermont house. "You're the one who truly loves this place," my father said, his eyes misty. "We know you'll take care of it the way it deserves." At 47, newly divorced and raising Amanda alone on a public school teacher's salary, owning a second home seemed financially impossible. But I couldn't bear the thought of losing our family sanctuary, so I accepted with tears and promises. Those early years of ownership were challenging. Teaching American literature to high schoolers was fulfilling, but hardly lucrative. I budgeted meticulously, putting away small amounts from each paycheck toward property taxes and maintenance. During summer breaks, Amanda and I would drive up to Vermont and I'd tackle one renovation project at a time, replacing rotting porch boards, repainting shutters, clearing overgrown paths through what had once been my grandmother's spectacular gardens. "Why do you work so hard on this old place?" teenaged Amanda would ask, often preferring to text her friends rather than help me weed the flower beds. "We could just sell it and buy something smaller, something easier." "This isn't just a house," I'd try to explain. "It's our history, our roots. Someday this will be yours and maybe you'll understand then." She would roll her eyes in that way teenagers have perfected, but occasionally I'd catch her sitting on the porch swing, looking out at the mountains with a thoughtful expression that gave me hope she might someday appreciate our legacy. As retirement approached, I poured more resources into the property. My late husband, Frank, who came into my life when Amanda was in college, fell in love with the place as deeply as I had. Together, we updated the ancient kitchen, finally installed proper heating so we could enjoy winter weekends, and restored my grandmother's gardens to their former glory. Frank's unexpected heart attack 5 years ago left me a widow at 62, but his final words to me had been about the house. "Promise me you'll enjoy every minute there, Ruby. That place makes you happier than anywhere else in the world." Frank's life insurance gave me the financial security to retire a year early. I'd planned to split my time between our modest suburban home and the country house, perhaps eventually selling this suburban property and living full-time in Vermont. The peace of those mountains called to me, offering solace after losing Frank. In my grief, tending to the gardens he'd helped restore became a form of therapy. By then, Amanda had married Tyler Blackwood, a successful investment banker whose family's wealth dwarfed anything we'd ever known. The Blackwoods owned multiple homes around the world, vacationed in places I'd only read about, and seemed to view my daughter as their latest acquisition. Tyler's parents, Gerald and Patricia, were perfectly polite whenever we met, but their smiles never reached their eyes, and they had a talent for making comments that sounded like compliments but felt like criticisms. "What a quaint little life you've built," Patricia said at Amanda and Tyler's wedding reception, gesturing at my modest mother-of-the-bride dress that I'd saved for months to afford. Amanda has told us all about her charming upbringing, how resourceful you were as a single mother. The first time I invited Amanda and Tyler to the Vermont house after their honeymoon, I noticed the shift in my daughter's perception. What had once been Grandma's old country house was suddenly a charming, rustic property with incredible potential. Tyler walked the boundaries of the 10 acres, asking questions about zoning laws and muttering into his phone about property values in the area. Mom, Amanda said during that visit, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone she'd developed since marrying into the Blackwood family. Tyler thinks this place could be absolutely gorgeous with some investment. His parents have this amazing designer who transformed their Aspen Lodge. Maybe we could connect you. I smiled and changed the subject, a tactic I'd been employing more frequently since the wedding. Later that night, I overheard Tyler on the phone, presumably speaking to his parents. Definitely underutilized, prime location. She has no idea what she's sitting on. That was the first red flag waving brightly against the Vermont sky, but I chose not to see it. After all, this was my daughter and her husband, not strangers eyeing my property for development. Family wouldn't betray family. How painfully naive that belief would prove to be. The following spring, Amanda called with a request that seemed innocent enough. Mom, Tyler and I are so stressed with work. Would it be okay if we use the Vermont house for weekends sometimes, just as a getaway? Of course I agreed. The house stood empty most weekdays while I taught my final year before retirement, and the thought of Amanda reconnecting with the property warmed my heart. Maybe those childhood seeds I'd planted would finally bloom. What began as occasional weekends soon expanded. Amanda called less frequently before their visits. Then I started receiving texts, rather than calls, heading to VT tomorrow, hope that's okay. By midsummer, I was essentially asking permission to visit my own property. We were thinking of coming up this weekend. Will you and Tyler be there? One Friday in July, I arrived unannounced, eager to spend my first official weekend of retirement at the property. What I found left me standing in the driveway, car keys dangling from my stunned fingers. The simple gravel drive had been widened and paved with expensive cobblestones. The front door, the original oak with brass fixtures that had welcomed 5 generations of my family, had been replaced with something sleek and modern that looked transported from a Manhattan penthouse. Inside was worse. The cozy living room with its comfortable if somewhat shabby furniture had been transformed into a glossy magazine spread. My grandmother's hand-knotted rug was gone, replaced by something cream-colored and surely impractical. The walls, once covered with family photos in mismatched frames, now displayed abstract art in perfect alignment. I was standing in the center of this foreign space when voices drifted in from the back patio. Through the new floor-to-ceiling windows, I spotted not just Amanda and Tyler, but Gerald and Patricia Blackwood, plus another couple I didn't recognize, all sipping something that definitely wasn't my homemade lemonade. Mom, Amanda's surprise was evident as she came inside. We didn't know you were coming. She hugged me quickly, her body stiff. You remember Tyler's parents? And these are the Hendersons. They live next door to Tyler's parents in Greenwich. The afternoon that followed was excruciating. The conversation flowed around me like I was a rock in a stream, with references to mutual friends, exclusive clubs, and properties and destinations I'd never visit. Occasionally, someone would make an effort to include me. Ruby, Amanda tells us you were a teacher. How fulfilling that must have been. When I finally found a moment alone with my daughter in the kitchen, a kitchen I barely recognized with its cold marble and stainless steel, I asked, Amanda, what's happening here? You've changed everything without asking me. She had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before her expression hardened. Mom, be reasonable. This place was falling apart. The Hendersons are thinking of buying property in the area, and we couldn't show them this house looking the way it did. Tyler's parents helped us with some updates. Isn't it beautiful now? But it's not yours to update, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This is my house, Amanda. Your father and I worked for decades to maintain it. Her laugh was light but dismissive. It's just a house, Mom. Stop being so controlling. Besides, you should be grateful. Do you know how much these renovations would have cost you? Later, I discovered my personal belongings had been boxed up and relegated to the shed. My books, Frank's favorite chair, the quilt my grandmother had made, all deemed too shabby for the Blackwoods aesthetic. I spent that night in what had been my bedroom, now transformed into a guest room where nothing felt familiar, not even the mattress beneath me. When I left Sunday evening, Amanda hugged me with renewed warmth. We love having you here, Mom. This will always be your home, too. The words should have been comforting, but something in her tone suggested a power shift had occurred. I was now the guest in my own family home. Over the next few months, this pattern continued. Each time I visited, more of my influence had been erased from the property. The gardens Frank and I had so lovingly restored were now maintained by a professional landscaping service that knew nothing of the history behind each plant. The shed where my grandfather had taught me to bait a hook was now a garden storage solution, filled with expensive tools that no one seemed to use. My friend Janice, a retired attorney, urged me to take action. "Ruby, you need to set boundaries. This is your property. They can't just take over like this." "But it's Amanda," I would respond, "my only child. How can I fight with my own daughter?" "The question," Janice said with the bluntness of a true friend, "is why your own daughter is fighting with you. This isn't normal, Ruby. Something else is happening here." Deep down, I knew she was right, but confronting the truth meant accepting that the little girl I'd raised, the young woman I'd sacrificed for, had somehow become someone I didn't recognize. It was easier to make excuses to tell myself this was just a phase, that eventually Amanda would remember who she was and who we had been together. That denial shattered on a crisp autumn day when I drove up for a surprise visit, hoping to gather the last of the season's apples from the ancient tree behind the house. The tree I discovered was gone. In its place was a construction site with markings for what appeared to be a swimming pool. A worker in a hard hat approached as I stood staring at the churned earth. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "What happened to the apple tree?" My voice sounded distant even to my own ears. "Had to come down for the pool installation. Mrs. Blackwood's instructions. Are you the inspector? We're not expecting anyone until next week." Mrs. Blackwood, not Mrs. Franklin. In that moment, something shifted irreversibly inside me. I found Amanda inside, directing another worker who was measuring for custom cabanas. Her surprise at seeing me quickly morphed into irritation. "Mom, you really should call before coming up. We're in the middle of some major work here." "I noticed," I said, still struggling to process the loss of the apple tree that had provided fruit for my grandmother's pie shade for countless family picnics, and whose lowest branch had held the tire swing where a young Amanda had once spent happy hours. "You cut down the apple tree." She had the audacity to look annoyed. "It was diseased, Mom. The arborist said it was a hazard." "What arborist? When that tree was fine, when I was here last month." "You're not a tree expert," she said dismissively. "Besides, the pool will add much more value than some old apple tree." Value. The word hung between us. "Is that what this place means to you now?" "Property value." Amanda sighed dramatically. "Mom, you're too old to maintain this property properly. The Blackwoods have invested a lot of money in this place. It's practically theirs now." "Excuse me." I stepped closer, certain I'd misheard. Amanda's eyes hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "The investments they've made give them equity. Tyler's father is a major real estate developer, Mom. He knows what he's talking about." "This is my house, Amanda. Your father and I sacrificed to keep it in our family." Her laugh was cold, cutting through me like the autumn wind outside. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic. We're still family, but the fact is you don't have the resources or the knowledge to maximize this property's potential. The Blackwoods do." I felt dizzy, grasping the new marble countertop for support. "I never agreed to any of this. I never signed anything." Something flickered across Amanda's face, guilt concern, but it vanished quickly. "It's for the best, Mom. The Blackwoods have invested money in this place. It's theirs now. You have no rights to go there without our permission." I stood frozen, the words hitting me like physical blows. This child I had carried, raised, sacrificed for, was trying to steal my property, my heritage, and hand it to her in-laws. And she saw nothing wrong with it. I don't remember driving away. Somehow I found myself parked at a scenic overlook miles from the house, tears streaming down my face as I gasped for air. Through the windshield, the Vermont mountains stood as they always had, indifferent to human suffering. The trees blazed red and gold, a final magnificent display before winter stripped them bare. I felt stripped too, of dignity, of security, of the future I'd planned in the home I loved. As the sun set behind the mountains, memories flooded unbidden Amanda taking her first steps on that wraparound porch. My father teaching her to fish in the same pond where he'd taught me. Frank and I dancing in the kitchen after finishing the renovation covered in paint but so proud of our work. The apple tree's blossoms drifting like snow across the spring grass. How had we come to this? How had the daughter I raised become so callous? And what would become of me now with my retirement? Dreams crumbling like the leaves beneath the wheels of my car, I cried until no more tears would come, until the mountains disappeared into darkness and the autumn chill penetrated my light jacket. Then with trembling hands, I started the car and pointed it toward home, not the country house that was no longer mine to freely enter, but the suburban house that had never quite felt like home since Frank died. One thought sustained me through that long, dark drive. This isn't over. I raised Amanda to be strong and determined. It seemed she'd learned those lessons all too well. But she'd forgotten something important. She'd learned those traits from me. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I called Janice. "I need a good attorney," I said without preamble. "Not for wills or estate planning. I need someone who'll fight." "Ruby Franklin," Janice replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Welcome back." 2 days later, I sat across from Sarah Williams in her downtown office. Sarah was perhaps 15 years my junior with a no-nonsense approach that reminded me of myself during my teaching days. I told her everything, holding nothing back about my own naivety and reluctance to confront the situation earlier. "Let me be clear," Sarah said when I finished, leaning forward across her desk. "You have never signed any documents transferring ownership or granting permission for these renovations." "Never," I confirmed. "Not even verbal permission for most of it." Sarah nodded, making notes. "And the property is solely in your name. No joint ownership with your daughter or anyone else." "Just me. My parents transferred it directly to me 30 years ago." "Good." She looked up, her expression firm but kind. "Mrs. Franklin, you're in a strong legal position. What the Blackwoods have done could potentially be considered criminal conversion of property. At minimum, it's unauthorized improvement of your real estate." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means they've spent a great deal of money improving property they don't own. In fact, legally speaking, those improvements belong to you now." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. "What do I need to do?" "First, we document everything. I'll have someone check property records to confirm your clear title. Then we'll send a formal notification that the improvements were unauthorized, but that you're willing to negotiate a fair resolution." "And if they refuse?" Sarah's smile was small but determined. "Then we remind them that unauthorized construction on someone else's property can result in removal orders. All that beautiful landscaping, the pool, the renovations, you could legally require them to return the property to its original condition at their expense." Over the next week, I followed Sarah's advice meticulously. I gathered old photos showing the property before the Blackwoods' interference. I found receipts for improvements Frank and I had made. I even contacted the town clerk, who confirmed no permits had been filed in the Blackwoods' names, only in mine as the legal property owner. During this time, Amanda called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail, buying time to strengthen my position before confronting her. Her messages were superficially cheerful but underlined with tension. "Mom, we need to talk about some paperwork for the Vermont house. Call me back." At Sarah's suggestion, I drove by the property midweek when I knew Amanda and Tyler would be working. What I saw confirmed our suspicions: delivery trucks unloading expensive furniture, landscapers installing mature plants around the newly completed pool, and workers hanging a custom-made sign at the entrance to the drive, "Blackwood Retreat." I took photos of everything, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and determination. This was no longer just about unauthorized improvements. The Blackwoods were attempting a complete appropriation of my property. Back at home, I reached out to neighbors whose properties adjoined mine in Vermont. The Hendersons, who had owned the farm next door for generations, were horrified by what I told them. "Those city folks have been acting like they own the whole mountain," Mr. Henderson growled. "Told me my tractor was an eyesore and offered to buy my back 40 acres so they wouldn't have to look at working farmland from their pool." Other neighbors shared similar stories, the Blackwoods introducing themselves as the new owners, complaining about local noise ordinances that allowed tractors to operate at dawn, even attempting to block a traditional right-of-way that crossed a corner of my property. The community's support strengthened my resolve. These were people who had known my family for generations, who understood the value of heritage and respect. Their willingness to stand with me against the Blackwoods' entitlement was a powerful reminder that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Sarah compiled all this information into a comprehensive dossier. "We're building an overwhelming case," she assured me, "but I still recommend approaching this with restraint initially. Give them a chance to back down gracefully." I agreed with her strategy, though part of me wanted immediate decisive action. The teacher in me recognized this as a teachable moment not just for Amanda, but for the entire Blackwood family. They needed to learn that wealth didn't entitle them to take whatever they wanted, especially not something as precious as a family home. When Amanda called a third time, I answered, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Hello, dear." Mom finally... "Listen, we need you to sign some paperwork for the Vermont property. Nothing complicated, just formalizing the arrangements we've discussed." "What arrangements would those be?" I kept my tone mild curious. She hesitated just long enough to confirm she knew exactly what she was doing. "You know about the Blackwoods' investment in the property? Dad's been working with a fantastic attorney who's drawn up everything. We just need your signature." "I see," I said. "And what would I be signing exactly?" Another pause. "Just a transfer of deed. The Blackwoods will handle all the maintenance costs going forward, and you'll have visiting privileges whenever you want, with notice, of course." Visiting privileges? To my own property? "Mom," her voice took on that condescending tone that made my skin crawl. "Be reasonable. You can't afford to maintain that place properly. The taxes alone." "Which I've paid faithfully for 30 years, I interrupted, "along with the mortgage which I paid off 15 years ago. But the improvements we've made, that I never authorized, I finished for her. Those improvements that were made without my permission to property that is legally mine." Silence stretched between us. When Amanda spoke again, her voice was tighter. "Mom, the Blackwoods have put over $200,000 into that place. They're not just going to walk away." "I'm not asking them to walk away," I said reasonably. "I'm simply declining to sign over my property. We'll see what Dad has to say about that. He doesn't lose Mom, ever." The threat was thinly veiled, but I refused to be intimidated. "I look forward to meeting with Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps we can all sit down like adults and discuss this situation." After hanging up, I immediately called Sarah to update her. "They're pushing for a deed transfer," I told her, "and apparently Gerald Blackwood doesn't lose." "Many wealthy people are used to getting their way," Sarah replied, "but they're also typically practical when confronted with reality. Let's see what they do next." I didn't have to wait long. The next day, I received a formal letter from Gerald Blackwood's attorney outlining the substantial improvements made to the shared family property and proposing a generous settlement wherein I would transfer the deed in exchange for a one-time payment of $50,000 and lifetime access privileges. Sarah's response was swift and unequivocal, a detailed letter asserting my clear legal ownership, documenting the unauthorized nature of all improvements, and stating that while I was open to discussion about fair compensation for their investments, any such discussion would start with the acknowledgement that I was the sole legal owner with no obligation or intention to sell. 3 days of silence followed. Then came the invitation that confirmed the Blackwoods' arrogance knew no bounds, an elegantly printed card inviting me to a housewarming celebration at the Blackwood Retreat, formerly the Franklin Family Cottage. Sarah advised against attending, but I saw an opportunity. "I need to see exactly what they've done," I explained, "and how they're presenting themselves to the community." "If you go," she cautioned, "say nothing about our legal strategy. Observe only. And remember, every unauthorized improvement they make only strengthens our position." So, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, I found myself driving back to the property that had been the centerpiece of my retirement dreams, dressed in my most elegant outfit, a navy blue dress I'd worn to a colleague's retirement party, with my phone set to record audio in my purse. Legal in Vermont, Sarah had confirmed. The scene that greeted me was like something from a luxury magazine spread. Valets in matching uniforms directed guests' vehicles. Caterers circulated with champagne and delicacies I couldn't name. A string quartet played on the newly expanded patio where my grandmother's rose bushes had once flourished. Amanda spotted me immediately, her expression flickering between surprise and anxiety before settling on artificial brightness. Mom, you came. She air kissed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. Tyler, look who's here. My son in law materialized with practiced charm champagne flute in hand. Ruby, wonderful to see you. What do you think of what we've done with the place? It's certainly different, I replied, neutrally accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. Very Blackwood. If he caught the edge in my voice, he didn't show it. Gerald and Patricia are by the pool greeting everyone. They'll be thrilled you could make it. I doubted that very much, but smiled and moved through the crowd. Familiar faces from the local community looked at me with varying degrees of confusion or sympathy, clearly uncertain about the property's status. The Hendersons nodded significantly when they saw me silently communicating their support. Near the abomination that had replaced my apple tree, I found Gerald and Patricia Blackwood holding court. Gerald, tall and silver-haired with the confident bearing of someone rarely contradicted, was mid-anecdote, complete eyesore when we first saw it. I told Amanda, "Darling, your mother did her best, but this place needs the Blackwood touch." Laughter rippled through his audience, though I noted the local farmers looked distinctly uncomfortable. Patricia, immaculately presented in what I suspected was designer resort wear, spotted me and froze momentarily before recovering. Ruby, what a lovely surprise. Amanda wasn't sure you'd come. I smiled with all the warmth I could muster. I wouldn't miss it. After all, this property has been in my family for 3 generations. An awkward silence fell over the group. Gerald cleared his throat and extended his hand. Ruby, good of you to join us. I trust you received our attorney's proposal. I did, I confirmed. My attorney responded. Yes, well, his smile tightened. I'm sure we can work something out that benefits everyone. Why don't we enjoy the party and discuss business another time? I moved through the gathering, recording snippets of conversation with my phone. The evidence gathered was damning. Gerald explicitly telling guests about our new vacation property, Patricia discussing plans to develop the acreage for maximum return, Tyler bragging about how they practically stole this place given Vermont property values. The most revealing moment came when I overheard Gerald speaking to another businessman near the bar. Between us, we snagged $1 million property for what amounts to decorating costs. The old lady has no idea what she's sitting on. By next year, we'll have subdivided the back acreage for 3 more vacation homes. The return will be spectacular. Throughout it all, Amanda flitted about like the perfect hostess, seemingly oblivious to the theft being perpetrated against her own mother. Only occasionally did I catch her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret: guilt, worry, defiance. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself near the old garden shed, now painted a sleek charcoal gray to match the house's new exterior. A young woman approached, Tyler's sister Caroline, whom I'd met briefly at the wedding. Mrs. Franklin. She seemed nervous, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about all this. The way they're treating you and your property isn't right. Her unexpected support caught me off guard. Thank you, Caroline. That means a lot. She fidgeted with her bracelet. Tyler and Amanda got caught up in Dad's vision. He does this. Sees something he wants and steamrolls everyone until he gets it. Mom enables it and the rest of us just adapt. Not you, apparently, I observed. A sad smile crossed her face. I learned the hard way. Dad did the same thing with my grandmother's brownstone in Boston. Grandma ended up in a retirement community while Dad flipped her property for millions. She never forgave him, or any of us, really. Before I could respond, Patricia appeared, her smile tight. Caroline, darling, the Winthrops are asking about your gallery. Ruby, I hope you're enjoying yourself. It's certainly educational, I replied. As Patricia led Caroline away, the younger woman gave me a meaningful look over her shoulder. The final straw came as guests were beginning to depart. Patricia, slightly loosened by champagne, cornered me near what had once been my beloved garden shed. Ruby, I've been meaning to discuss this shed situation with you. It's the last rustic element that doesn't quite fit our aesthetic. We're thinking a tennis court would be perfect in this space. The landscapers can start Monday. I looked at the shed where my grandfather had taught me to tie fishing flies, where I'd planted my first seedlings, where Frank and I had sheltered during a sudden summer storm and ended up dancing in the rain afterward. No, I said simply. Patricia blinked, clearly unaccustomed to direct refusal. I beg your pardon. No, I repeated, steel entering my voice. The shed stays? But we've already contracted the tennis court. The materials are being delivered next week. You should cancel those deliveries, I advised, gathering my purse. And while you're at it, you might want to consult with your attorney about the legal implications of unauthorized construction on someone else's property. I left her standing open-mouthed by the shed, making my way to where the valets had parked my modest sedan among the luxury vehicles. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the house my grandparents had loved, my parents had preserved, and Frank and I had cherished. Behind its new facade and surrounded by unfamiliar landscaping, I could still see the bones of the place that held my heart. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt not just anger or grief, but absolute clarity of purpose. The Blackwoods had made a critical mistake. They'd assumed that a retired schoolteacher would be easily intimidated, that my love for my daughter would make me pliable, that their wealth made them invincible. They were about to learn otherwise. The following Tuesday, Amanda called, her voice bubbling with excitement that sounded forced even through the phone. Mom, great news, the moving trucks are coming tomorrow. The Blackwoods are bringing in all their furniture and art collection for the house. Isn't that wonderful? They're really committing to the property. That's interesting, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I wasn't aware they'd be moving in permanently. Well, not permanently, Amanda clarified quickly. It's still just a vacation home, but they want it properly furnished with their things. Mom, she hesitated, then pushed forward. Dad's attorney will be bringing those papers for you to sign. Could you come up tomorrow? It would be best to finalize everything while everyone's there. I'll be there, I promised. But I won't be signing anything tomorrow, Amanda. Mom, I'll see you tomorrow, dear. I ended the call before she could launch into the manipulative tactics she'd learned from the Blackwoods. Immediately, I called Sarah. They're moving in tomorrow. Full furnishings, art collection, the works. Sarah was silent for a moment. This actually works perfectly with our strategy. They're investing even more into property they don't own. Are you ready to proceed with our plan? Absolutely, I confirmed. I'll meet you at the agreed location tomorrow morning. That night, I barely slept, but it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. By dawn, I was showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and driving north toward Vermont. 2 hours into the journey, I pulled into a roadside diner where Sarah waited with Sheriff Johnson, an imposing figure with kind eyes who had known my family for decades. Mrs. Franklin, he greeted me. Sarah's filled me in on the situation. I've confirmed your clear title to the property. What these folks are doing constitutes trespassing at minimum. What should I expect today? I asked as we settled into a booth. I'll accompany you to the property, but stay initially in the background, he explained. We'll give them a chance to resolve this reasonably, if they choose otherwise. He shrugged his broad shoulders. I'm authorized to enforce trespassing laws and removal of unauthorized persons. Sarah opened her briefcase, extracting several documents. I've prepared everything, clear proof of your ownership, documentation of unauthorized improvements, and notices of trespass if needed. We also have the court order ready if they refuse to cooperate. And a locksmith is on standby, Sheriff Johnson added, along with the security company you contracted. We reviewed the plan one final time before continuing our separate journeys to the property. I arrived first, deliberately timing my entrance to precede the Blackwoods' moving trucks. The house stood quiet in the morning sun, its new modern exterior unable to fully disguise the beloved structure beneath. I used my key, I had never surrendered it, and entered what felt like a stranger's home. The interior renovations were even more extensive than I'd realized. Every trace of my family's history had been erased, replaced by sleek, impersonal luxury. I walked slowly through each room, saying a silent goodbye to the memories each space had once held. In the master bedroom, now transformed into a designer showcase, I found boxes of photographs and mementos that had been removed from display. my history packed away like unwanted clutter. Most disturbing was the discovery in the back of a hall closet Frank's favorite reading chair, the worn leather one he'd spent countless evenings in reading while I graded papers nearby. They had hidden it away too valuable sentimentally to discard, but too shabby for their refined tastes. I ran my hand over the armrest where Frank's hand had rested, drawing strength from the connection. Sheriff Johnson and Sarah arrived shortly after parking discreetly down the drive. At 10 o'clock precisely, the procession began. 3 large moving trucks emblazoned with an exclusive Manhattan Moving Company's logo, followed by 2 luxury SUVs containing the Blackwood family, their attorney, and Amanda and Tyler. I positioned myself on the porch, Sheriff Johnson slightly behind me as they pulled up. The confusion on their faces as they spotted my car in the drive was almost comical. Gerald Blackwood was the first to exit, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. "Ruby, what are you doing here? We weren't expecting you until this afternoon." "It's my property, Gerald," I replied calmly. "I don't need an invitation." His gaze shifted to Sheriff Johnson, now moving to stand beside me. "And who is this Sheriff Michael Johnson, County Sheriff's Department?" He introduced himself officially. "Mrs. Franklin has asked me to be present today." Gerald's face darkened as he realized this wasn't proceeding according to his plan. Patricia exited the SUV next, followed by Amanda and Tyler, all wearing expressions ranging from confusion to alarm. "What's going on, Mom?" Amanda demanded, striding forward. Why is there a sheriff here?" "I think we should all have a conversation before those trucks are unloaded." I suggested reasonably. "Sarah, would you join us, please?" Sarah emerged from her parked car, briefcase in hand, the picture of professional competence. Gerald's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, quickly recognizing the challenge to his authority. "You've brought an attorney," he observed flatly. "As have you," I noted, gesturing to the distinguished gray-haired man emerging from the second SUV, clutching a leather portfolio. "Shall we all sit down like civilized people?" Gerald hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to having his plans derailed. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine, but these trucks are on a schedule. They need to begin unloading." "Actually," Sheriff Johnson interjected, "I'd recommend waiting until our discussion concludes. There may be complications." We gathered on the expanded patio, the irony not lost on me that we were using the very improvements the Blackwoods had made without permission. Sarah efficiently arranged her documents while Gerald's attorney did the same. Amanda sat beside Tyler, her face pale, while Patricia maintained a frozen smile that suggested she expected this unpleasantness to be resolved quickly in their favor. "Let me be clear about why we're here," I began, my teacher's voice carrying across the patio. "This property, despite all appearances and assumptions, remains legally and solely in my name. I have never signed any documents transferring ownership, granting permission for renovations, or agreeing to any arrangement that would give the Blackwood family rights to this land." Gerald's attorney leaned forward. "Mrs. Franklin, my clients have invested substantial sums in improving this property. Under certain legal principles." "Under Vermont law," Sarah interrupted smoothly, "unauthorized improvements to another's property do not create ownership rights. In fact, Mrs. Franklin would be within her rights to demand restoration of the property to its original condition at the improver's expense." A heavy silence fell over the group. Gerald recovered first, his businessman's instincts kicking in. "Ruby, be reasonable. We've increased the value of this property significantly. We're prepared to offer fair compensation." "I heard your definition of fair compensation at your party," I replied. $50,000 for a property you yourself valued at over $1 million, not counting the improvements you've made. That's not compensation, Gerald. That's theft." "Mom," Amanda interjected, her voice strained, "the Blackwoods have been incredibly generous. This place was falling apart before they stepped in." "This place," I corrected gently, "was a beloved family home with 3 generations of memories. It may not have met the Blackwoods' standards of luxury, but it was well maintained and cherished." "Enough of this," Gerald said abruptly, his patience visibly thinning. "We had an understanding with Amanda about this property. She assured us—" "Amanda is not the owner," Sarah interjected. "She had no legal authority to make any agreements regarding this property." Gerald turned to his attorney. "Phil explained to them about implied consent. We've been making improvements for months with Ruby's knowledge. Phil shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Blackwood, if Mrs. Franklin never provided explicit consent, and especially if there's documentation of her objections, the implied consent argument is weak. Gerald's face reddened. This is absurd. We've invested over $300,000 in this property. Without permission, Sheriff Johnson reminded him quietly. That was your choice, sir. I leaned forward, meeting Gerald's angry gaze directly. Let me be absolutely clear, Mr. Blackwood. This property is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone. It has been in my family for 3 generations, and I intend to keep it that way. We'll sue, Gerald threatened. We'll tie this place up in litigation for years. Sarah smiled thinly, son. You're welcome to try. Meanwhile, Miss Franklin has obtained a court order prohibiting further unauthorized access or modifications to her property. Sheriff Johnson is here to enforce that order effective immediately. She slid a document across the table. Phil reviewed it, his expression growing grave. This appears to be an order, Mr. Blackwood. The court has indeed issued an injunction. Gerald stood abruptly, towering over the table. This is outrageous. I don't lose Ruby. I've broken tougher opponents than a retired school teacher. Dad, Tyler cautioned, placing a restraining hand on his father's arm. Not here. Sheriff Johnson stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, I'd advise you to calm down. This can proceed civilly, or it can become a matter for official intervention. Your choice. Patricia, who had remained silent until now, touched her husband's sleeve. Gerald, perhaps we should consult privately with Phil. While the Blackwoods conferred with their attorney, Amanda approached me, her face a mask of confusion and betrayal. Mom, how could you do this? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Amanda, I said quietly, they were trying to steal my property, your inheritance, and you were helping them. They were improving it, making it better. Better by whose standards? Not mine, not your grandparents or great-grandparents. This was our family home. Amanda, not an investment property for the Blackwoods to flip for profit. What are you talking about? They weren't going to flip it. I shook my head sadly. I overheard Gerald at the party discussing plans to subdivide the back acreage for development. Did you know about that? The shock on her face answered my question. No, that can't be right. Tyler would have told me. Would he? Or has he become so caught up in his father's plans that he's forgotten where his loyalties should lie? Before she could respond, the Blackwoods returned. Gerald had composed himself, adopting the cool demeanor of a man accustomed to negotiating under pressure. Mrs. Franklin, he began formally, it seems we've had a serious misunderstanding about this property. While we believe our improvements have significantly increased its value, we recognize your legal position. How gracious of you to recognize reality. I replied, unable to completely suppress my sarcasm. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. We propose a compromise. We'll purchase the property at full market value, including our improvements. You'll receive fair compensation and will avoid lengthy legal proceedings. That's not a compromise, Mr. Blackwood. That's you still getting exactly what you want. I stood gathering my strength for what needed to be said. Here's my position. You and your family will vacate my property today. The moving trucks will turn around without unloading. By the end of the week, I want all personal belongings that you've already moved in to be removed. And the improvements? Patricia asked tightly. Consider them rent for the unauthorized use of my property, I responded. Though I'd be within my rights to demand restoration to the original condition, I'm willing to keep the structural changes. The furnishings, artwork, and other portable items, however, are yours to take. Gerald's face flushed with anger. This is highway robbery. No, Mr. Blackwood, Sheriff Johnson interjected. Robbery is attempting to appropriate someone else's property through manipulation and intimidation. Mrs. Franklin is being more than fair under the circumstances. Gerald looked ready to explode, but Phil placed a restraining hand on his arm. Mr. Blackwood, I advise accepting Mrs. Franklin's terms. Legally, she could demand much more. A tense silence fell over the patio. The moving truck drivers shifted uncomfortably beside their idling vehicles. Finally, Gerald gave a curt nod. Fine, we'll remove our belongings, but this isn't over, Ruby. Actually, it is, I replied, nodding to Sarah, who produced another document. This is a formal agreement stating that the Blackwood family renounces any and all claims to this property now and in the future. In exchange, I won't pursue legal action for the unauthorized modifications or emotional distress. You expect me to sign that? Gerald scoffed. I do. Otherwise, my next call will be to the district attorney about potential charges for attempted property theft and criminal trespass. Phil reviewed the document and whispered something to Gerald, whose expression darkened further. After a moment of internal struggle visible on his face, he snatched the pen Sarah offered and signed with an angry flourish. As the Blackwoods began directing the moving trucks to turn around, Amanda approached me, tears streaming down her face. Mom, what have you done? Tyler's parents will never forgive this humiliation. The question, Amanda, is whether I can forgive your betrayal, I replied softly. You were willing to help them take everything I've worked for, everything that should have passed to you someday. I thought we were all going to share it. That's what Tyler said. A family compound for all of us. I looked at her tear-stained face, suddenly recognizing the manipulated child beneath the sophisticated exterior. Oh, Amanda, you really didn't know what they were planning, did you? Her confusion was answer enough. Tyler approached cautiously, his expression unreadable. Amanda, we need to go. My parents are leaving. Actually, I interjected. I'd like both of you to stay. We have things to discuss. Tyler glanced toward his parents, who were directing the removal of some artwork that had already been installed. I should help them. Your parents have plenty of help, I observed. This conversation is more important. Reluctantly, Tyler nodded. Once the Blackwoods had driven away, Sheriff Johnson and Sarah discreetly withdrew to give us privacy. The three of us sat on the patio furniture that had been part of the unauthorized renovations, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. Did you know about your father's plans to subdivide the property? I finally asked Tyler directly. He couldn't meet my eyes. He mentioned some potential development opportunities. And you didn't think to mention this to Amanda or to me, the actual owner. Business is business, he muttered, but without conviction. Dad sees opportunities others miss. What he saw was a vulnerable widow he could manipulate through her daughter, I corrected. Tell me, Tyler, was any of this your idea, or were you just following your father's playbook? His silence was damning. Amanda looked between us, the truth finally dawning on her face. Tyler, she questioned softly. Your dad really was going to develop this land after you told me we'd use it as a family retreat. He shifted uncomfortably. It would have still been partly a retreat. The main house for us, the new builds for rental income or resale. It's just smart business, Amanda. It's deception, I corrected. And it stops now. Both of you need to decide where your loyalties lie. With each other and our family, or with Gerald Blackwood's schemes. The conversation that followed was long and painful. Tears were shed, hard truths acknowledged. By sunset, we had reached an understanding Amanda and Tyler would need to rebuild my trust, but they were welcome to visit the property as guests, not owners or managers, while we worked through the damage done. In the weeks that followed, I reclaimed my home inch by inch. The renovations, though not to my taste, were admittedly high quality. I kept some changes, reversed others, and slowly reintroduced elements of my family's history to the spaces. The garden shed remained exactly where it had always been, though I did allow it to keep its new paint job. Most importantly, I planted a new apple tree where the old one had stood. It would take years to mature, but I took comfort in knowing that someday it would provide shade and fruit for future generations, but only if they learned to value heritage over profit, connection over possession. Amanda and I began the slow process of healing our relationship. Tyler, to his credit, eventually made a genuine apology, admitting he'd been caught between his father's expectations and his wife's trust. The Blackwoods themselves maintained a cold distance, but through Caroline I learned they had redirected their development ambitions to a commercial property in upstate New York. 6 months after the confrontation, I invited Amanda and Tyler to the country house for a weekend visit. As we sat on the porch swing that I'd reinstalled, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Amanda asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her. Mom, how did you find the strength to stand up to the Blackwoods? They've intimidated everyone else in their path. I considered my answer carefully. When you've spent decades nurturing young minds, you learn that the loudest voice isn't always the right one. Bullies, whether in the classroom or the boardroom, count on others being too intimidated to challenge them. The moment you stand firm, their power begins to crumble. I'm sorry I didn't stand with you from the beginning, she said softly. You're standing with me now, I replied, squeezing her hand. That's what matters. As part of my healing process, I established a family trust for the property with clear terms. The house would remain in the family but could never be sold or developed commercially. Amanda would inherit the right to use it, but ownership would remain with the trust, protecting it for generations to come. The greatest surprise came from an unexpected quarter. Caroline Blackwood contacted me several months after the confrontation, asking if she might visit. Over tea on the porch, she shared that her stand against her family's actions had inspired her to make other changes in her life. You showed me it's never too late to draw boundaries, she said. I've started setting some of my own with Dad. He's not happy about it, but for the first time, I'm living my life on my terms. The journey from betrayal to healing wasn't swift or easy. There were days when the pain of Amanda's actions still cut deeply, when I questioned whether our relationship could ever fully recover. But slowly, like the new apple tree putting down roots in the Vermont soil, we established a stronger foundation built on honesty and mutual respect. Now, a year later, I divide my time between my suburban home and the country house exactly as I'd planned before the Blackwoods entered our lives. Amanda and Tyler visit monthly. Their relationship with his parents noticeably cooled. The local community, which had witnessed the entire drama, has embraced me with renewed warmth, appreciative that the city folks hadn't managed to change the character of our shared landscape. Most importantly, I've reclaimed not just my property, but my sense of self. The woman who once nodded and smiled in the face of outrageous demands has been replaced by someone who knows her worth and isn't afraid to defend it. It took the Blackwoods' attempted theft to remind me of something I'd taught my students for decades, but had somehow forgotten for myself. Your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and it's never too late to stand up for what's rightfully yours. The wounds of betrayal have healed into wisdom. The property that was nearly stolen has become even more precious, and the mother-daughter relationship that was almost sacrificed on the altar of wealth and status has been reborn stronger for having weathered the storm. Sometimes, as I sit on the porch swing in the evening watching the shadows lengthen across the lawn toward the young apple tree, I whisper a thank you to Frank, to my parents, to my grandparents who built this sanctuary. Their legacy endures not just in the property itself, but in the courage they instilled in me to protect what matters most. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take what was rightfully yours? I'd love to hear how you handled it in the comments below. Sometimes the most difficult confrontations lead to our greatest growth. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of resilience and renewal. And remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power and protect what you love. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the strength to defend what matters most in your own life.